What's up, metal and heavy music fans? It's Flight of Icarus again with metaltrenches.com, and today I wanted to take another walk down memory lane to the days before I was a metalhead. Everyone has to start somewhere, and growing up in the 90s, there were plenty of non-metal groups on the airwaves that made an early impression on me. These are just 10 alternative songs that started me down the road to much heavier music. But before I do that, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel. And stick around after the video because there's plenty more content like this to check out. First up is Everclear with El Distorto de Melodica. So Much for the Afterglow was one of my first albums that I owned on CD. I had a friend in grade school who had family that were pretty keyed into the latest up-and-coming stuff, and this was definitely an album we were all listening to at that time. And aside from it still being one of my favorite alternative albums of all time, with so many great singles to talk about, it's a deep cut that I really need to highlight for this list. Far from the poppier vibes of the rest of the album, track 8 is an instrumental stumble down the rabbit hole into straight up industrialized metal and rock that is heavier than anything they have done before or since. I remember being dumbfounded by the sound every time I listened to it, but there was something so magnetic and addictive about those crunchy riffs and distant effects-driven laughs and screams. Next up is Nirvana, Smells Like Teen Spirit. So this one almost goes without saying. I'm sure I'm one of millions, really, who heard this classic track and felt something awaken within. It's not just the great drum intro or the hook that launched 1,000 burgeoning young players to Guitar Center. It's something in the atmosphere. There's this bleak, haunting darkness that lingers between those simple, sustained notes on the verses. That rumbling bass riff, and each scratchy, breathy syllable in Kurt's voice. This was my entry into the darkness, much later fostered by black and death metal.
"'Cause I'm a liar, yeah, I'm a liar. I'll tear your mind out, I'll burn your soul."
Another big one for me was Rollins Band with Liar. This one I remembered vividly. I was out of school sick, and since both of my parents were working, I had to stay at a neighbor's house that day. We didn't have cable at my house, so it was a treat to have access to more channels while down with a cold. Flipping through, I stumbled onto MTV, and staring me right in the face was this screaming, red-painted madman I would much later learn to be the one, the only Henry Rollins.
All the electronics around you poisoning the airwaves. Technological fucking civilization.
Seeing this giant imposing figure scream about being a liar while flailing around, burning sets in the desert, juxtaposed with other images of him as a straight-laced police officer or even Superman, initially sent me looking for cartoons again. But my morbid curiosity brought me back to witness the insanity. It wasn't until many years later in college when I got my first iPod and was building a 90s playlist that this memory returned to me, and I discovered the wonders of Rollins Band's weight and the charismatic frontman's prolific career. Even so, it was another brief moment that really opened my eyes to the world of more intense, in-your-face music. Next up is Dave Matthews Band with Halloween, and this may seem like a strange one, but being the younger brother and taking a lot of road trips with a group of older kids in the 90s, I was exposed to a lot of Dave Matthews Band, and despite not being a fan back then, it was really impossible to avoid. But one song in particular stood out to me as different from the others. Track 6 on the 1998 album Before These Crowded Streets takes a hauntingly eerie turn with horror movie string arrangements, a much darker minor key, and a performance from Dave that is, simply put, maniacal and frankly disturbing. Wait until I come and I will steal you. Wait until I come, I'll take your soul. He sings in the voice of a deranged stalker or serial killer. By the time we reach the insane crescendo of Love is Hell, He sounds more animal than man. This song really messed with my head, especially given the band's usual stereotype as kind of a bunch of happy-go-lucky jam band stoners. And honestly, listening to it now, it still gives me goosebumps to this day. Then we've got Smashing Pumpkins with Zero. Back to another obvious choice here. We could probably do an entire podcast on the many Smashing Pumpkins songs that formed a bridge to our taste in metal. But when thinking back to the one that caught my attention the most on the radio, it was this 1995 cut that is still a fast favorite early song to learn on the guitar, myself included. The riff is the stuff of legends, and Billy's lyrics and vocals positively dripping with bitterness and disdain. When I think of the voice that best captures a sense of rebellion from that time period, it would probably be his classic nasally delivery. I listened to this song as a young kid, and despite not having a real care in the world at that age, it filled me with this overwhelming desire to fight the power, whatever that was. Then it's Filter with Hey Man, Nice Shot. Another one-off deeper cut, though this track still gets pretty regular radio rotation on rock stations. I actually never became a Filter fan over the years, but this and Take a Picture were simply unavoidable on the airwaves at the time. This one's obviously the much darker of the two, and even without understanding the connections to the morbid story of Pennsylvania State Treasurer Bud Dwyer's very public on-camera suicide, it filled me with a sense of dread and unease. I'm also noticing a trend on this list of great bass parts, and this one will go down in history as one of the most recognizable of all time. You hear it slowly kick off in the intro, and I'm always like, hell yeah! That's not even to mention the great rising chorus riff and hoarse, commanding performance of T-1000 brother and former Nine Inch Nails member Richard Patrick. Next up, it's going to be Green Day with Take Back. Green Day was responsible for a lot of early entryways to me from punk to rock, but I'd also argue that this 1997 cut from Nimrod was oddly enough probably my first introduction to death metal vocals. The song is mostly a pretty traditional, albeit bleak and monotone approach for the band, but on the delivery of the titular lyrics, Billy Joe inexplicably shifts to a belchy snarl that really caught me off guard the first few times I heard it. It was a strange choice, but one that ends up working quite well, and both in terms of the direction of the song and showcasing a broader scope of the band's capabilities. Needless to say, I ultimately approved and was intrigued to hear more from this strange style. Just don't get it, keep it copacetic. Then it's Local H with Bound for the Floor. This was a big one. This is a song I must have heard 10,000 times, given that Local H are local to my original hometown of Chicago, and even so, it's one I never skip or click away from. From the moment that repetitious yet strangely infectious guitar riff kicks in, I'm all ears. It's hypnotic. And similar to what I said about both Nirvana and Smashing Pumpkins, there's this expansive sense of bleakness in Bound for the Floor that captures a similar mood I get now listening to the likes of everything from Code Orange to Cattle Decapitation. I guess I'm just a sucker for music that crushes your soul. Your contribution left unnoticed, son. On a similar note, there's Helmet with Unsung. Dun-dun-dun, dun-dun-dun. Dun-dun-dun. That riff is positively designed to get stuck in your head for hours. Helmet stands tall as one of my favorites of the era, with albums like Meantime and Betty perfectly capturing the angst and intensity of 90s rock music. They definitely sent me down a rabbit hole to heavier and heavier bands, and further solidifying my ongoing craving for in-your-face riff-driven music. Modern metallic hardcore owes a lot to them. And last but not least, it's Allison Chains with Rooster. I was initially intrigued by this song given the juxtaposition of its serious tone with a lyrical concept that, at least at the time, seemed really goofy to me as a young kid. Obviously, it's a metaphor for wartime concepts, but at the time, singing along to what felt like a silly chorus in a very imitatable vocal inflection, eyes burn with stinging sweat, was what helped me get into what became a very important band in general. Alice in Chains were easily the most overtly metal of the big grunge bands of the time, and Dirt could probably be called one of the first actual metal albums that I own. The more I think about it, the more this almost feels like a doom metal track. Regardless, from Them Bones to the powerful closer Wood, there are so many great choices, but this was the one that started me down the road to the wonders of Lane Staley. Rest in peace. And that'll do it. That's just 10 alternative songs that just kind of kickstarted my road to metal music, even though these are not classically considered metal songs. If you enjoyed it, I'd be really interested down in the comments to hear what songs you heard as a young person really got you started down that same road. What kind of heavier songs that weren't quite metal piqued your interest and ultimately got you to where you are today. And also, let me know if you'd be interested in me doing future installments of this, because this is really just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many songs I could talk about on here, and it was kind of difficult, honestly, to whittle it down to just 10. But besides that, as always, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel, like the video if you enjoyed it. Hop down in the description, you can find links to all of our social media. You can also join our email newsletter, which I send out personally every Friday to keep you up to date with everything that's going on at metaltrenches.com. And also, if you're a returning viewer and you really feel like you're getting added value out of this channel, then please do consider donating even just $1 a month to our Patreon or Subscribe Star. It really makes a difference and I really appreciate it. But that said, just stick around. There's plenty more videos like this one to watch, tier lists, album reviews, album rundowns, retrospectives, what have you.